later, we're once again on the Warriors roller coaster. They have won four of their last six. They've won
7 of 10.
seven of their last. Let me get there. They won seven of their last 10. In this 13 game stretch we've talked about, or this 19 game stretch we've talked about for a while now, they're now 7-5 in that 12, first 12 games of it. They've got seven more games on this upcoming homestand. There's a whole lot of stuff that has happened over the past couple of weeks, but uh, where are we at in the current moment with the Warriors in terms of stock up, neutral, or down? Where are we at?
I I rudely interrupted you with the 7 of 10, but I did that
Everybody
because
in
that's,
Golden State going 7 out of 10. Here we go.
I mean, the fans certainly aren't, and it doesn't feel like a 7 out of 10, right? Because mixed in with that was the Draymond stuff, all that. But I will say the people on the ground level right now are mentioning not only 7 out of 10, but the three losses are the Toronto loss, which is a should be win, right? You played well enough and you just gacked it down the stretch.
Mm-hmm.
The Clippers lost the other day, which they looked at like the formula of that game. I think it was 20-7 in turnovers, like, on the good side for the Warriors. They just felt like they missed a ton of open shots. So like they came out of that game, like played well, felt like they played well enough to win. And then the third loss is the punt against Oklahoma City where they just played nobody. So they're like
Sure.
really out in their last 9 games that they like tried in essentially, they feel like they should have 9 wins and they do have 7 wins. So they're feeling as, good about their state of things right now. And I mean, I don't know if you watched any of the pressers last night, but they're talking about how focused it feels. And then the other aspect of last night was like Melton and Horford are healthy and producing. And that was the formula when they signed him this summer.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, those were the two guys that coming into the season, when healthy, especially in Melton's case, you looked
Yeah.
at and they were going to be impact players. And I think you said after last night's game, it's the best game the two of those guys have played together. Obviously, there haven't been a lot of good games that Al Horford has played overall this season, dealing with this back issue and other stuff. I saw Al briefly in Brooklyn, said he was feeling better. He seemed like he started to look better, play a little better lately, coming back from this back issue. We saw LeBron James have kind of a similar path back from his back issues. He's looked better as the season's gone on. I do think there are some signs for optimism. Now, look, we have talked a lot about this 13 game stretch and or this 19 game stretch. I keep saying 13. This 19 game stretch through the end of this homestand on January 20th against Toronto to really get to that point and have a sense of where this Warriors team is and where we think they're going to go as far as how the trade deadline goes. So let's before we get into anything else, let's just do a
Yeah.
top line look at this homestand. So Friday night, your favorite team, the Sacramento Kings, goes to the gold. I was almost at the Golden One Center.
Roaring down
Goes,
I-80.
yes,
Roaring
roaring down
down
I-80
I-80.
to go to the Chase Center. We're giving the Warriors a win in that game, right?
I mean, if you're, yeah, I mean, I don't want to do the whole they're definitely going to win, they're definitely not because we've seen this team this year,
Well, but
but
let's just project out. I'm going to project it out because I think
favorite.
it's good to set a baseline of
Yeah.
where on the 21st this team is sitting.
6-2 is the term I heard last night by a few people. Like get a 6-2 8 game
So
homestand. Like
including the game last night,
yeah,
obviously
they're
when
one
they
and
beat
zero. Yeah,
Milwaukee.
yeah.
Right. So we say Sacramento then is a win. Atlanta obviously just traded Trey Young, kind of an
Tough game.
interesting
Tough game.
matchup for them. But let's say they win that game, will be charitable. It's a home game. Uh, they open this stretch losing at Portland, but
They're
they
0 and
probably
3. They're 0 and 3 against the Blazers this season.
probably should get a win against Portland. You would think.
Well, that would at least signal a healthier state of things because that's been their kryptonite this year.
That's true. We'll say they lose to the Knicks at home.
Can I say one thing about that Knicks game? That
Yep.
is the second night of a back-to-back for the Knicks. The night before, they will be in Sacramento for the whole like Mike Brown, Doug Christie, Mike Brown return game. So I'm not like, obviously it's going to be a difficult game for the Warriors, but you are going to be getting, I think, a somewhat emotional Knicks team that is, going to San Francisco overnight. So maybe you get like a lessened version of it.
Sure, but we'll say that's a loss.
Yeah,
But
sure.
then they've got Charlotte at home, Miami at home, and Toronto at home. Like, it does feel like, again, we said before this stretch started that if they could come out of it um, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 or 13 wins in this 19 game stretch and go 13-6, go 12-7, give themselves, a real cushion over 500, and uh, give Mike Dunleavy in this front office a reason to have some belief these guys can make some noise. That could really shift what their trade deadline outlook looks like compared to if they come out of it going 8-9, 9-8, and they're hovering around 500, and you're going, why would you really invest in this team? And they have gotten now to a point, Slater, where I think if we just look at it, yeah, I think 6-2 is reasonable. That would get them to 12-7 in that stretch. And I think if they come out of that stretch 5 games over 500, I think you would have to look at it and say, overall they would be what, 25-20, and probably feeling pretty good about where the Warriors are at. And I'd assume they'd probably be fairly aggressive trying to make the team better if that's the case.
Yeah, and the their chunk money besides their main guys is inactive within the stretch, right? We all know about the Jonathan Kuminga 22.5 just rotting over there on the bench, but Buddy Hield's been out of the rotation. We're talking about a nice little, like 8-ish, 9-ish million.
Yeah, close to 10.
Yeah, Moses Moody is starting, and he plays a role, like an obviously starting important role on this team, but it's not like he's been such an explosive part of this stretch, especially with Melton rising, and I do want to talk about Melton in a second because I thought some of the conversation last night was interesting, but he's 13. I'm not saying you're definitely moving him. I'm just saying as they head to the deadline, they actually have some, like, building blocks to maybe get something done that aren't going to significantly impact what's on the floor right now. Starting obviously with Kuminga's 22.5.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it is going to be really interesting to see how the stretch goes. But as you said perfectly, this Warriors team has shot itself in the foot a lot. And even during the stretch, they could say they should have won all those games. They tried like hell to lose to the Nets. They obviously did lose to the Raptors. They've lost all these games earlier in the year. We've talked about a bunch. So let's see if they can actually follow through and deliver with the kind of performances that they're going to need to go to 5-2 over these next 7 games or better to get where they want to go. You mentioned the Draymond stuff before. He obviously got ejected again from the game against Utah the other night. We've talked a lot about his play being very up and down. Where do things sit with Draymond at the moment?
They weren't mad about the Utah ejection for 2 reasons. I mean, number one, and I said it the other day on TV, but like him departing these games early has not been like extremely detrimental to them because of his plus minus over the last month.
It's kind of the underlying thing that he's not played very well.
Yeah, and you take it back to a few years ago when he was having the suspensions and he was getting ejected early in games. It was like they really felt like that was anchoring their team down, where like he was so influential to winning that year. And obviously over the last month, he's been trying to find that. And I would say over the last, they say about a week, clearly they had the come to Jesus moment, him and Steve on the bench. And then, the press conference afterwards, the apologies at the practice you were at. Like that has mattered. Everybody behind the scenes says he has like really mentally locked back in and his energy's been very good. Several people last night were talking about like his focus level, and it's becoming clearer to me that, obviously people see the kind of temper flare-ups on the court, but it's all at its core was related to his turnovers. And they still think he's an elite defender. Obviously, the 3-point shot is going to be questionable, the spacing issues, some of the finishing, especially at this stage of his career. Sure, but that's all baked into what you expect with Draymond Green. What they have been telling him they can't have and what he's been kind of boiling about was the turnovers. And, the games where it's 5, 6, the Portland loss, remember, in Portland where Steph has 48. Well, like there's a bunch of really detrimental Draymond turnovers. Phoenix, where he was defensive post game about, how great of a passer he is, and he's got to stop second guessing himself. Well, last night, as they're talking about the focus level, Draymond admitted, like, he had to have a conversation with Steve Kerr that wasn't just about, hey, let's ride this dynasty out nice together. It was like, hey, you got to stop taking as many chances as you're taking. It's not 2017, number one. And what I thought was an interesting point that Draymond said Steve made to him was it's a different league. And these teams in transition are feasting off these turnovers. It's just like when you're throwing these live ball hit aheads, like it's just completely changing the game. Sure, maybe it's only 3 to 4 a game, but it's shifting the game.
That's 8 points a game.
Yeah, and it's like they're just energy killers, momentum builders for the other team, whatever you want to say. And he said, I heard it and I took it to heart. And he's been safe with the ball lately. He's been a lot safer with the ball. And it's it was 20-7. I mentioned in the Clipper game. I know they lost it, but they were very happy about that total. And then last night, I think they only had 9 turnovers as a team. And I believe I saw it was the first time in like 2 years they've gone single digit turnovers in back-to-back games. So that part has been important. And I think, despite all the bluster and the bigger picture conversations about Draymond, I think the thing they're lasering in on is just like stop turning the ball over, and he's been better with that.
Yeah, that is true. It does not really cover up the fact though that he has struggled and the team has been just fine when he hasn't played. Like for example, in that Utah game when he got ejected after giving up the wide open dunk while complaining to the refs about the 3-second call, he was I believe minus 15 in 12 minutes in a game they won by 9, and that they
Yeah.
came back to win, which
Plus
has not
15 in
been
the Clipper game. And I was, it's the last 2 games, like you felt his impact. Last night, I thought good on Giannis defensively, was really like
Yeah,
happy
he
with
was.
himself post game. And, it was funny. So Steve Kerr gets ejected right in the Clipper game. And has a funny moment. I asked him we hadn't talked to him because Terry Stotts does the press conference post game. So we hadn't seen Steve until pregame last night. I asked him about it, and all he was talking about was his mom was like, at the game. She lives in LA, and was like on him post game saying, "Oh, I thought you were going to hit the ref." And like, so Nick Friedel took that chance to kind of ask Steph and ask Draymond about, times in their career that their mothers have been like upset with them. And as he did that, Draymond busts out his phone and starts reading texts from his mother over the last week. He was just like, and she was killing him for like, the way he was, kind of temper tantrum.
Draymond's mom, as anybody who
Yeah.
knows anything about Twitter knows, has always been very vocal about Draymond for a long
Yeah.
time.
He
She's not
started then
surprising her
explaining-
son has loud opinions. Put it that way.
Yeah, well, he was also like, I'm terrified of my mother. He said that within this recent stretch, she told him we have to have a heart to heart. She texted him that, and he said, I've been avoiding it. I don't want to do it. He said I need to stack about 4 to 5 good games together before I have this heart to heart, so I can say, look, I've already turned the
done
corner.
better. Yes.
So
great.
to that point, I mean, he's been really, in a good mood post game. Even the Clippers loss, it's a time where there's like a lot of criticism swirling around. I mean, we did an NBA Today segment that was probably 10 minutes long with, Perkins is up there debating whether they should be traded.
That's the underpinning of the whole thing, right? Is that if the Warriors are going to make a significant trade, if they're going to trade for some star level player, say, I know Giannis just gave his latest speech to Sam Amick, our pal from The Athletic, that he's not going to ask to be traded. But let's say Giannis became available and the Warriors want to trade for him. Let's say the Warriors decide they want to trade for Anthony Davis or some other star player. If they'd wanted to trade for Trey Young, obviously they weren't going to do that. But like any player with a big salary, there's only 2 ways to get there. It's trading Jimmy Butler or it's trading Jonathan Kuminga and Draymond Green. Those are the only 2 paths as of today in season to trade for a star player. And as we have talked about, there's nobody who's more aware of what's going on with these kinds of things than Draymond Green, the guy who hosts his own podcast, who's very online, knows everything that's going on.
And he's a sharp business guy. Very
yeah,
sharp.
And he's been paid. He pays attention to business in the league. He's aware of all of that. So I think until we get to February 5th, and this is all 100% in the rear view, that's just going to be an undercurrent of all these various things that are going on, which is that this is a guy who really wants to stay with the Warriors and who, for a variety of reasons, is on, I wouldn't say completely uncertain ground, but a lot more uncertain ground than he's been at just about any other point in his tenure with the Warriors, which I think is part of where the volatility has come from.
Yeah, I remember even last year when they were struggling, it wasn't about him necessarily, but win now, fading dynasty, whatever, team is struggling, they're going to look to make changes as they did last year. And they ended up, stair step building a package to get Jimmy Butler with Andrew Wiggins' contract. But I remember even at the time, there was like at least somewhat of noise of like, well, what if you did Draymond as the contract? What if you kept Wiggins? And I remember even talking to him then, like he wasn't under some illusion that he was just like guaranteed a roster spot forever on the Warriors. So even when there was talk about, hey, if you go get Durant, which they obviously tried to do, would he be okay with playing with Draymond? Now, the
Yeah.
idea was to keep Draymond within those talks, anyways. But my point is, yes, you're right. He's definitely trying to rebuild the foundation of his, just like a strength as a core member of this organization. And the answer to that has always been like really sharp, focused play and winning impact. And at least over the last few games, that's it's been back.
Yeah, I would say. And look, if they continue to win, right, there's ways to get to trading for a, 30 to 35 million dollar player or players that make that much, multiple players that could get the Warriors back some really good impact players that doesn't involve Draymond Green, obviously. So there are a lot of different ways this team can build out the roster and improve,
The
which
other
gets,
thing I'd say, I
yeah.
mean, which we already know, but obviously one of Draymond's like staunchest backers has always been Steph Curry, and I thought Steph had an interesting quote last night. He was kind of more talking team, although it was within a Draymond question. And I specifically asked him about Draymond, but like his point was how much at this stage of his career, him and Jimmy and Draymond recently had talked about enjoying not only like the individual matchups like Draymond guarding Giannis, but trying to, I think he said like pull themselves out of this like stretch of averageness is what he said. And like the fact that, I think Steph is talking about like, you know, enjoying these summits where he's talking to Jimmy and he's talking to Draymond and they're trying to, solve the issues at hand. And like that part still matters to Steph, and like doing it with Draymond still like, that's Steph's preference.
Well, this goes
Obviously
back to the
yeah.
this goes back to the story you wrote with McMahon about Clay, right? And like, there's obviously a lot of disappointment on all sides that is not still the case, and I do think there's a lot of feelings across the board, not just from Draymond, but from Steph, from Steve Kerr, from other members of the Warriors, that they would like this to end with everybody there until the end. Maybe get Clay back at some point down the road, but you know, it's also the NBA,
It's
and
also a business. Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
business. And the only guy who's definitely not going to be traded is Steph, and everybody else, we'll see. We'll see what happens. One guy who would love to be traded is Jonathan Kuminga, as you mentioned before. I believe he's played 10 minutes in a month.
Yeah.
He has been pretty much absent as this entire run has gone on. The one game he had a chance to play in when they punted against the Thunder, it was about an hour before the game, right? When he was suddenly scratched with back tightness, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was hearing about 4 hours prior that it was very
But
possible he's missing it. But to your point, Steve Kerr in his pregame presser says he's going to play if Kuminga is out there, because at that point he'd at least been questionable with
yep,
back soreness. He said if he's out there, the plan was to give him a nice runway of minutes, and then he was ruled out probably
then he was ruled
30.
out. Do we think he is going to play before the trade deadline for the Warriors as of right now, if we had to guess?
No, um, I don't think so. I've definitely was talking to a few people yesterday. I'm like, the question I was asking a few people in the arena was over under 0.5 minutes on this homestand. I had a lot of people being like under. That's
I
kind of
would
the
I would say under
expectation.
too.
Yeah, I mean, even okay, they're blowing a team out by 25. They're not going to like insert him into the game. Um, they need to solve his future. A decision needs to be made about him.
But
That's
again,
something.
though, as you've reported, it doesn't.
Well, that's a decision
That's
too.
the
That's a
I mean, is
decision
it?
too. Well, I mean, it's another kick the can down the road. I will say
Well,
if he's here one day after the deadline, it's gonna be loud, and there's gonna be some like, what the heck is the plan here? Like that,
yeah.
it will be. There'll be a little bit of a Richter scale earthquake at several levels of things. But I will say, if that is the case, they got to then rethink about how maybe to at least try to get him back in the mix to be some type of a helpful option at some point. I don't think you can just have him sitting over there the way he is right now, where like, he's basically, I mean, he's been fine. He's been in a good mood. I've talked to him several times. Like he's not causing any issues, but he's just not a contributing member on the basketball court. And I think everybody's okay with that right now. I will say if he remains around, you got to figure out a way to like at least make it a legitimate option to put, an athletic wing on the floor at times if needed in certain games. But again, I did report that, I am being told that it's possible he sticks around for market dynamic reasons that we
Well,
can
for
get
what
into.
we've talked about, that they're not going to just take on bad money to just get rid of them and make it harder to make a deal this summer as opposed to having a $24 million expiring contract, right? Which they can be very useful in a deal. And as you've also reported, the other complicating factor for this, there already was a limited to very limited market for his services this summer. It's not like there were 12 teams trying to get him, there were a couple. And now, on top of that, those teams are looking at what's going on and him not playing and saying, yeah, we don't need to pony up and give up more stuff to get a guy that's not in your plans. So why are we going to do that? Which only
They're
makes
saying less.
this whole
They're
thing.
saying less.
Well, that's
stuff.
that's what I'm saying though. Like
Yeah.
the whole thing is just made more complicated by him not having a role on the team. If he was scoring 17 points a game and playing well, maybe his value's up. At worst, it's the same. But if you're a total non-factor, it makes your hope of extracting real value for him that much harder to do.
Yeah, but there are personal dynamics at play, and I'm not just talking about Jonathan Kuminga's career desires. I'm talking about veterans who know how late in their potential contending window they're in, saying that's $22.5 million. That's a very flexible piece to get a very helpful player. Again, they're not saying go get a third star.
Well, in this is where this homestand, I think, if I'm Jonathan Kuminga, I am rooting with both fists in the air for every. He
was clapping last night.
No. I'm not saying he's not. But
I'm laughing at what you're saying.
He needs to root for the Warriors to win every single game. Because if they go on a 10-game winning streak and they look like they're a threat, having Jonathan Kuminga sitting there with a giant contract, relatively, that they could turn into somebody who can help take them another step up, the pressure on that from the vets, from the media, from
coach,
ownership, from the coach, all of that pressure builds if the team looks like it's worth investing in.
Well, I will say, I think the pressure is going up towards ownership, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
On that particular situation.
That's certainly true. But that's why we've kept talking about this 19-game stretch with a bunch of home games and winnable road games, and like, can these guys give the front office a reason to not slam the foot all the way to the floor, but make some moves and
cash a chip in that might not be, well, definitely is like, probably at its lowest value, and you were already not liking the value.
Well, look, I think his if they make a move with Jonathan Kuminga, it's going to be to get some sort of impact player, and Kuminga's salary will be the make weight to do it. They're not making a trade with Jonathan Kuminga, almost certainly, where some team says, we really desire Jonathan Kuminga, which has been the whole problem from the beginning. Because if somebody really was like, yeah, like the Kings this summer, as you've talked about a bunch, if the Kings were like, we're going to give you our 2026 first-round pick for Jonathan Kuminga, he would have been on the Kings. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to do a protected pick or bad money.
Protected.
Right, but my point is, like, it wasn't it wasn't that much of an asset. The Suns had a bunch of mediocre to bad money. That was never really a realistic path. But if they are winning games and playing well, and they're fighting for a top 6 spot in the West, and you could sit there and say, hey, if we can add an impact piece, maybe we can get to 5th or 6th in the West. Maybe we can make a run in the West playoffs. Oklahoma City is like really struggling all of a sudden. Like, maybe things are more wide open than anybody thought. We still have Steph Curry. Like, we still have belief that we can be a threat in the West playoffs. All that becomes a lot easier to justify if the team is winning games. So, ironically, there should be nobody rooting harder for the Warriors to win games right now than the guy who has been hoping to get out of Golden State for, 2 years? 2.5 years? 3 years?
Did you see the Draymond podcast clip where he was talking about Kuminga on the bench?
How great a teammate he is? Yeah.
Well, he did. But he told the story of Pajemski coming over, basically complaining about getting taken out quickly. Basically bristling about playing time. And Kuminga's been interesting because, like I said, he's been in a good mood, and he's, when he was kind of playing but not playing as much as he wanted, oftentimes he'd be in the tunnel, he'd be on the bike. His frustration was obvious because when he's in a belief that he's part of the group and yet he's not being on the floor, oftentimes he will separate himself a little bit, get on the bike, kind of work out his frustrations. He's so out of the rotation now. He's been on the bench, just chatting it up, pretty friendly all game because he knows that, they ain't calling him in the game. But Draymond told a pretty funny story, trying to, in some ways hype up Kuminga. And even within it, I think he said, hey, if you're trading for him, this is the type of guy you're getting. But it was, in some ways, a pretty funny story about Podziemski going over and basically bristling about playing time around Jonathan Kuminga, which is kind of ironic in some ways. Kuminga's sitting there bro, you kind of got to get used to it.
This is life. I mean, and that is the thing, too. It's for as awkward as the situation has been, there's not really any villains here as much as it's just been a very awkward marriage of necessity on both sides for longer than everybody probably would have liked. And the question is, will it last for another 6 months or another month? And I think not to harp on it, but I do think a lot of that comes down to how many games this team wins over the next couple of weeks. Because I think that's only going to increase the desire to improve the roster and to give this group the best chance it can. Because I think we've agreed on this from the beginning. Mike Dunleavy will be willing to do something if the group shows him it's worth doing something. And I think, as they've fumbled their way through a lot of the first half of the season, that has been the big question, is how much can they prove that it's worth doing? And they've started with this stretch to put themselves in a position to do that.
I would say from my educated guess and talking to people around the situation, my expectation right now is he will be traded. Number one. Two, I will also say, having been around this situation for 5 years, if you told me he was still on the team in 2032 and still we're sitting here well, the value, is this the deadline? And he's a veteran at that point. I also wouldn't be too shocked. So,
yeah. It'll be interesting to see. What else has stood out to you about the last week or so in Warriors land?
Well, so Melton goes 22 points in 25 minutes last night. Honestly, the 22 is, he hadn't been shooting well. It seemed to be finding his groove. A couple players mentioned his blow by layup. His secondary playmaking and burst seems to be coming back a little bit. Obviously, his shot, which was way off, he hit, I think, 5 of 9, something like that last night from 3. But the 25 minutes, and Steph post game said in a roundabout answer about Melton's impact, said he's your prototypical starting 2 guard in the league. And I thought that was just an interesting term to use, considering he's not their starting 2 guard right now. Moses Moody is, and while Moses Moody, has had fine season at times, he's been hotter in stretches. He isn't necessarily your prototypical starting 2 guard. And I asked Steve about that, considering the minutes. He said they're obviously still climbing his minutes up and easing him back, and he hasn't played in back-to-back, so the plan remains to keep him off the bench. But he also said once Rick Celebrini gives him the green light to play 30 minutes a night, he's probably, and I'm talking about Melton, he's probably going to play 30 minutes a lot of nights, and mentioned, hey, who's been closing the last several games? DeAnthony Melton. So it's important for him to stay healthy. We've talked about it plenty. His track record there is spotty, but it's trending in a very positive direction for them, to the point of, if it keeps going this way, I wouldn't be too surprised if come March, April, he's the starting 2 guard. And also on the other end, Al Horford last night detailed a little of the sciatica he was dealing with, talking about the nerve stuff he's never felt before. He missed a chunk of games, and it's interesting because you were at this game. He mentioned coming back for that game in Philly, and we were like, oh, he's back. He's going to guard Embiid. It's a good matchup for him. He said that was just him and the training staff realized it was too early. He didn't feel like himself, so they shut him down for another chunk of games. But right now, this is the healthiest he's felt all season. So I don't think he's going to start, because he's still kind of your 20-minute regular season guy. But there's a chance come game 1 of a playoff series, DeAnthony Melton starting 2, Al Horford starting 5 with maybe some climbed up minutes. And they are who we thought they wanted to be with all those veterans.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, I will be a little surprised if Melton ever gets in the starting lineup, because I think with all the injuries he's had, I could see this being an Alex Caruso situation, where Caruso almost never starts, but he closes all the time. And sometimes he'll start the second half and he plays somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. But they kind of manage him a little bit because of how he plays and his own injury history in Oklahoma City. And I feel like that's really the likely path for this to take, just because, I mean, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Melton's awesome, but he's had so many injuries that I would think you've somewhat got to have the throttle down to make sure that he gets through the year. But certainly it has been a really big development for Golden State that he has been out there and playing like this. And it's not to me a giant coincidence that, when he's gotten out on the court, things have started to look better. I mean, on the season, so he's played 13 games. I'm sure you know this. You know what his net rating is when he's on the court?
Nope. Not exactly.
Plus 10.9.
I knew it was good, yeah.
And their offense is 120.7, which I want to say would rank inside the top 5 in the NBA. And their defense is 109.7, which I also think would rank within the top 5 in the NBA. I'm going to pull that up quick while we're talking. But now look, obviously DeAnthony Melton is not the most valuable player on the Warriors, so sometimes these on-off numbers are a little skewed in that regard. But yeah, 120.7 would be the third best offense in the league, right between Boston and Houston, and ahead of the Knicks and ahead of the Thunder and ahead of the Spurs. And that defensive rating would be second in the league, only behind the Oklahoma City Thunder, ahead of Detroit, ahead of Toronto, ahead of San Antonio, ahead of the Heat. So that's awfully impactful. And being a full 11 points worse when he's off the court, the more he can play, the better. And I don't think it's a huge shock that his return and his increase in minutes has coincided with this group playing better. Now, before we go, we talked about this stretch of the schedule a bunch. Got the Kings, got the Hawks, got the Blazers, then the Knicks a week from today. What are you, beyond just the record, what are you watching for over the next week with the Warriors?
Thought you were going to segue me into a little small Kings segment.
We are.
Kings story this
week.
Again.
Let me cook. What are you watching for with the Warriors over the next week?
Yeah. Just continue. Can this remain stable? Can this remain focused? As Steph is very diplomatic in his press conferences, but sometimes he tosses little, nuggets in there that, you should, I guess, take notice of. And I thought last night, he was just like, we're focused. That is the environment he craves, is just a very professional, focused, distractionless situation. Now, over his tenure with the Warriors, around him, there's often distractions, and as good a soldier as he is, especially for his status, it frustrates him. And right now, you can tell he's really liking the energy that is being brought, to work by everybody. And this always profiled as the stretch that they should all feel as rested as possible. Although they had some really massive plane trouble lately. They were delayed 5 hours going to LA, and then on their way back from LA, they got in the air. They were flying, and there was some issue that they had to turn around and go back to LA. Anyway, they got back at 5 a.m. So, but to the point, that's all I want. Going to these games against very winnable opponents, I'm not only trying to follow the win-loss, I'm just following the vibe of the team. And does it remain extremely focused on building a win streak type thing? Can they? What are they? So right now they're 20-18. Let's say they go 6-1 over the next 7, which it's feasible. I'm not predicting it.
Yeah,
you're talking about 26-19. That's
5-2 or better. That's that's the standard. Can they go 5-2 or better? Which they ought to. I mean, they're probably going to be favored in all but one of these games. So if they go 5-2 and they're 25-20 or better, that sets them up to be, where we talked about when this stretch started, 12-7 over those 19 games and successful homestands, and then we'll see where they're at. Now, you mentioned the Kings. You wrote this big story on Sacramento and the state of their rebuild under Scott Perry, their first-year GM. I encourage people to go read it on .com. But you're obviously around the Kings a lot. We joke about it. You live out near Sacramento.
Yeah.
But what, the Kings not good at basically anything. They're down near the bottom of the standings. They might, be able to get a top 2 or 3 pick in this year's draft. We'll see if they get lucky for a change in the lottery. But what do you make of where the Kings are at right now, and what do you think their plan is for the next few weeks going into the deadline?
I would say because they're 8-29 and people look at some of the contracts on their books, I think there's been a lot of like external dialogue about like, what the heck is the plan here? What's going on? Like, what are they even thinking? And it's like they obviously flamethrowered their situation over the previous 2 seasons, particularly last season with the Mike Brown firing, with the panic De'Aaron Fox trade, with the, blowing up their front office. Obviously, as I reported within there, the Vivek taking the steering wheel. Like, yeah, it was a massive screw up of a situation over the previous 12 to 18 months, but they have a pretty clear plan right now. They installed Scott Perry. They've given him some real power. If you're around that team, like that is the voice, everything kind of filters up to him, including the head coach who feels, empowered. And as I reported in that, Doug Christie, despite their record, his job is safe right now. And it's like their plan is to eat the contracts if they have to, because they're not, panic. We got to go find something. We need a splash. We need to win more games in March and April. No, they hope to have a very good pick in the draft. It is a good draft up top. If they get a top 4 pick, that will immediately become the most important player in the organization. And they say right now they're going to have a patient multi-year rebuild. We'll see how long the patience lasts, but that's the plan, and they need it. And we've been saying they need it. There's a reason they need it, and it says some stuff about how they're run, but I think it's pretty obvious what's going on there. And they're 8-29, but you don't. If you're around them, it's not like, oh, like, why are we 8-29? What, this must be fixed right now. It's just like, this is where we drove ourselves into, and now let's climb out of it slowly, really.
Do you expect a lot of trades between now and February 5th, or no?
If the league wants, if the league is going, if the Milwaukee Bucks or whoever's like Zach LaVine, yeah, we'll throw some expirings at that. If somebody really tries to come and take Domantas Sabonis from them because they really value Domantas Sabonis, like, sure, Scott Perry will talk about that.
Let's put a stop on Sabonis for a second. Let's say the, I don't know, make up a fake team, not trying to do a fake trade. If some team came to the Kings and said, we will give you expiring contracts, the Trey Young deal. Let's say the Trey Young deal gets presented for Domantas Sabonis. What do the Kings do?
I think they have a
conversation. They get out of the contract?
I think they have a conversation with Domantas Sabonis, and I think it's possible. I think spinning out of these contracts as quick as possible is, on Scott Perry's wish list, and I know that he doesn't plan to attach assets to do it, but you mentioned the Trey Young deal.
But that's the Trey Young deal. Like, if they get presented a chance to get out of the Domantas Sabonis deal, they have to take it. They have to just clear the decks and get out of all these guys. And now I'm with you. It would be insane to attach assets to any of these guys. The team's going nowhere. Just, you can be patient. But if make up the team said, hey, we've got $40 billion in expirings. We like Domantas Sabonis. He fits with our team. I don't know how they couldn't do that and just do what the Hawks did and say, hey, we're going to reset and go in another direction.
I agree. The complicating factor there is Domantas Sabonis has a torn meniscus that, partially.
No, for sure. There's other
and he's trying to rehab and come back. He didn't get the surgery. That complicates his trade discussions right now. He's not on the floor. Now he is nearing, it seems. He's really trying to work himself back and rehab that. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think these guys for expiring contracts certainly can be had because the idea would be next season, the Kings got a ton of young guys on the floor, including their first round pick, and they're very likely a lottery team again, but they're, it's a growing lottery team. And, LaVine will be expiring by the summer. Maybe he can be traded by the deadline. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously the plan. So anybody that is out there like, what the heck are the Kings doing? That's what they're doing. Like they're rebuilding, even though he doesn't want to say the term rebuild. That's what they're doing.
Yep, that's certainly true. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens there in the rest of the league over the next few weeks, and especially with the Warriors, see if they can keep things interesting for you, Slater. But thank you, as always, for watching. And we will talk to you guys probably next week after this Knick game.